Hey everyone, and welcome to 1 year of indie game dev in Unity. This showcases progress I've made in developing a game I started in Unity in December 1 year ago. I've been working on it part-time, and overall I would say this year would be about 3 to 4 months of full-time work. This is what the first version of the game looked like 1 year ago, and then what it looks like today. In the beginning, I wanted to make an FPS. I was into shooters like Doom 2016 and the indie FPS DUSK at the time, so I was inspired to try to develop something in the spirit of those games. Although I quickly got sidetracked and another game became the main influence, a lot of the shooting and feel is inspired by those two games. In the first week, I made a simple skeleton for a shooter where you could run around and aim a gun. I was playing a little with the look, trying some intense red themes as the base because I knew I wanted the game to have the aggressive style of the games inspiring it. It was after this point when I started thinking about what I wanted the gameplay to be like. I had been playing a lot of DOWNWELL on my phone and was imagining what the game would be like as an FPS. So I made a well to jump down and added some very basic enemies. One of the first things that became apparent in 3D versus the side-scrolled 2D view is that you lose foresight into what is going to be below you. In 2D, you can see what enemy is going to be under a block before you destroy it, so since you know ahead of time, you can start moving out of the way or get ready to shoot it. In 3D, the blocks would be directly in between you and the sight of the enemy, so it wouldn't be clear to you there was an enemy 1 meter below you until you shot through the block above it. This is why I tried the see-through shaders for the enemies you can see here. This lets you be aware of what is going on in the well beneath. Fast forward a few months, I cleaned up the menus, HUD, and levels a little. And I also added a shotgun, bullet hit effect, and better looking enemy explosions, as well as trying out some other little things such as a sprint button you see in a lot of FPSs. In the end, I haven't kept the sprint in mainly because it's such a small area anyway, and I decided for a default move speed that is already pretty fast. I also in recent versions have cut out aiming down sights, again because it's just a small space, it doesn't make much gameplay sense. So I'll be focusing on a more arcade style first person bullet hell type game than a game where you need to be able to sprint and aim down sights. You can also see one of the main mechanics related to ammo similar to DOWNWELL. When you are in the air firing bullets, you're spending ammo, which is that bar along the bottom, and it reloads when you land. The bar on the left is a jetpack that boosts you upward when holding jump, and it also refills upon landing. This footage is from April. The game is getting a lot meatier and the first signs of being any sort of fun at all are starting to show. It's only engaging to play for a minute or two, but it's a good start and the core gameplay loop is starting to form. The additions here include a breakable block type that can be shot through bat enemies, gems that drop from killed enemies, an indicator HUD for highlighting enemies on-screen and off-screen with red arrows to help the player's spatial awareness. This lets you have a way to sense oncoming attacks from behind, above, or below. There are also now some rooms that split off from the main well area containing health and gun drops. The visual style has also been tweaked and improved a bit. The block boundaries are clear and outlined with black, and the HUD has a visual improvement as well. Moving forward to June, one of the biggest differences is the hand-placed block arrangements, whereas before it was programmatic placement in simple patterns. For this, I made a small chunk editor, and this allows me to easily design some block patterns that I will then randomly stitch to accomplish the procedural generation. In the most recent version of the game, I used both a combination of handmade and code-generated chunks. The chunks here are not really reflective of what I think will be good level design, it's mostly just a proof of the implementation. I also introduced two main playstyles. One is just the basic loadout with a jetpack and standard shooter mechanics. The second one I made attempts at a gun pushback system where shooting downward gives you a kickback and sends your player upward almost like a jetpack would, but only when firing bullets. This was an attempt at seeing how it might be possible to transfer DOWNWELL's dual-purpose design to 3D, but I wasn't too crazy about how it felt, so the main focus is still just a more regular shooter setup plus jetpack. The small floating ring you see below the player was also the first test of a stand-in for feet. When you land on an enemy from above, it would kill the enemy. Similarly, I just didn't find a good feel for this, so it's not super likely to be in the game, but I just wanted to try out some of the DOWNWELL mechanics. There are a number of other new details like the floating embers and the contextual music that plays a more energetic track when fighting enemies and a calmer track when no enemies are near. For the final music, I would like to find some metal to have playing when near enemies and ambient cavern sounds when not in combat. Also here I began adding some new gun models with varying accuracies, but they are all so far just functioning as shotguns as a placeholder. By August I had added some variation in gun projectile, a Gauss cannon that could shoot at multiple objects and enemies in one shot, a hunting rifle, a rocket launcher, and others. This is also when I settled on a name for the game and decided to call it Hellver. I also brought up a site with a basic landing page. Other additions include improved enemy meshes for the floating blobs, now they're horrific skulls. Also I added some player legs that are animated when moving and jumping. The lighting was also updated a bit so the well was overall darker, but there was a spotlight coming from the player's view as if wearing a lit hard hat. I experimented with the startup UI for showing a gem collection power-up bar that would fill up if you collected enough gems in a short time before it depleted. I'll later make it give the player a damage buff or other power-up. By December there had been a lot of improvements, many in the internals of the code, but a decent amount of new features as well. First off, from some feedback I received about the visuals, I changed the color palette to be a lot more gray so the enemies could later be made red and stick out better. Continuing on some feedback from a few playtesters, a common issue was that falling down the well felt uncontrollable and often too fast. Part of this was there was a lot of open space in the chunk arrangements and that it was easy to shoot through a straight path downward, causing unblocked falling for long segments. So I worked on block arrangements that would form constrictions and cause the player to slow down at regular intervals. With regards to the block sizes, a lot of the code was unflexibly written for assumptions of the current size, so I refactored it enough to let me try out other block sizes and went to a bigger block size that felt more comfortably sized for standing on. I also started fleshing out the various gun types and adding some enemies. Regarding the enemies, I grabbed some creepy monster assets and made some flying insects, wall-crawling spiders, and some floating octopuses. I'm experimenting with how these enemies can position themselves either below the player or spanning the width of the well so as to block their descent until killed. This enemy pathfinding motion was done with the A-Star pathfinding project, which I will link in the description below. Out of the box, it operates on ground-based motion for 2D and 3D games, but it required some extension to support the full 3D space pathfinding I was looking for. Fortunately, the code is easily extendable, and the documentation gives examples for how to write customizations for the graph generation and agent motion implementations. That wraps up my year of indie game development on Hellver. Thank you for watching, and stick around for the trailer.